Everyone, thanks for spending a wonderful Saturday morning with us. And this is the fellowship, the connection that gets dopamine and serotonin going in our brain. So we need that human connection. That's why we formed PBNM to get that message out, to connect with people, not as physicians or health coaches or PharmDs, but as people talking to people. So thank you for coming out in huge numbers. I'm an endocrinologist by training, and like Kaushik mentioned, if you met me 5 years ago, you wouldn't hear me talking of anything that I'm talking today, or if you told me that diabetes could be prevented or reversed in many cases, it would be deaf ears. So I have a fascinating story, but I think for the interest of time, I'm going to skip that. But I got into nutrition in my fellowship training, and again on my own, nothing that the curriculum required, but I got looking into it, and I've been doing this for almost 5 years now, and putting that in my practice too to help my patients. So food is the medicine that I focus, along with the medicines that I do prescribe, but food is the cornerstone. So the picture you see on the screen there is one of my actual breakfast plates. I call it the sunshine breakfast because it has this nice orange quarters on the boundaries, and it is chopped banana with some slivered almonds and pistachios, some pomegranate seeds, some raisins, and walnuts, and some cinnamon powder. And so I follow what I preach, walk the talk. You will not hear me talking about medications today because the focus of today's event is food. So it's going to be heavily focused on food. And I would like to thank my friend and one of the board members for PBNM, John Lardingen, for really sprucing up the slides and making them more colorful. So if you don't see a lot of studies, it's not that the data is not there, but I chose not to show it here. So if you are interested in studies, just grab me afterwards and I'll be more than happy to share that with you. I have a private practice in Wesley Chapel called Center for Preventive Endocrinology and Nutrition, which is what I literally follow: prevention, prevention, prevention. No financial conflicts of interest, and this just a disclaimer that this is for education purposes. This is not for diagnosing or treating. This is not professional medical advice, but a lot of information and knowledge that I've gained over the years. So, what's diabetes? You know, we hear this word every corner, everybody knows about it. It's kind of omnipresent now. But diabetes literally means, it's a Greek word, and it means to pass through, to siphon. And mellitus is a Latin word which means sweet. So diabetes mellitus means you're siphoning sweet urine. It's not new. It's been described in ancient Greek medicine, which is why you have the word diabetes, which is a Greek word. It has been described in an ancient Indian medicine of Ayurveda, which is the science of living, and it's called madhu prame. Madhu means sweet, and prame means excess urination, so basically sweet excess urination. And as a matter of fact, the first test that was designed to detect was the patient would be asked to pee on the ground and just observe that area if the ants are crawling into that area, because ants will be attracted to sugar. And so if you're peeing sugar in the urine, then there you go, you have diabetes. Our kidneys have a very amazing capacity to absorb sugar back into the blood and not let it leak out into the urine up to a certain limit. So up to 200 milligrams per deciliter, our kidneys filter back into the blood, and you don't see any sugar in the urine. But when the sugar starts running higher, then 180, 200 milligrams per deciliter, that's when you start seeing sugar flowing in the urine. And because glucose is an osmotic molecule, it pulls water with it. So you're peeing more amounts of urine because it's pulling more water and you're getting dehydrated. And over time with diabetes, that threshold of reabsorption actually shifts towards 240 milligrams per deciliter. So you're actually still conserving more sugar in the system than peeing out. And this is my only mention about the medication in the whole presentation, is there's a group of medications called SGLT2 inhibitors, which brings that threshold back to the 180, 200 mark. So it makes you pee sugar again. But that's not how we want to treat diabetes, is by cheating, by peeing more sugar, but actually eating foods that don't end up getting high sugar. So, symptoms. As you can see, the first symptom is no symptoms. And I put it there because diabetes is a very silent disease. You could have changes related to diabetes happening for 5, 10, sometimes 15 years before you're formally diagnosed with diabetes. And many times you're actually diagnosed when you have a complication. You end up cutting yourself and it doesn't heal up, or you end up having gangrene in your foot that needs to be amputated, or you're having genital yeast infections, or you're having issues with erectile dysfunction. So you could be blindsided many times by not having symptoms, and then when the sugar starts running high, you will get the symptoms. There are 3 classical symptoms called the 3 P's of diabetes. So it's called polydipsia, meaning you drink a lot of water because you're peeing out a lot, which is polyuria. And because your sugar is just circulating through you, siphoning, your brain still thinks there is not enough sugar for it, and it keeps making you eat more. So it's called polyphagia. So polydipsia meaning more water drinking, polyuria meaning peeing out a lot, and polyphagia meaning you're eating more, because you just can't suppress your appetite. How is it defined? So, as I mentioned earlier, the cutoff was pretty high at 200 milligrams per deciliter of glucose. If it was above it, that's when it was diagnosed. In 1996-97, there was a group of experts that got together and decided the diagnostic criteria. And they decided that 126 milligram per deciliter as your fasting sugar, that and above, with the 3 classical symptoms, the 3 P's, or if your random sugar is running about 200, that's considered diabetes. Now, there's a nice trivia about why it's 126 as the cutoff, is because majority of the experts were British, and they use a millimole per liter system there. So 126 milligrams per deciliter is equals to 7 millimoles per liter. So that's why it was 126 and not 124 or 120. But it's not that you are normal at one number and then you suddenly become pre-diabetic overnight, and then there is a switch that turns on and you become diabetic. It is a progression. It is a progression of disease over time. It's not putting switches on and off. So if you have A1C, which is the latest criteria, looking at a fraction of your hemoglobin that binds with sugar and that stays in your blood for 3 to 4 months. So you can look at an average sugar number called the A1C fraction of hemoglobin. And if it's above 6.5, then that's considered diabetes. Up in the corner, 5.7 to 6.4, it's pre-diabetes. And 5.6 and below is considered normal, but as I said, it's not that you're putting switches on and off. It is a progression. So if your A1C is 5.2, that's optimal. If your A1C is 5.6, yes, it is normal technically, but it is not optimal. Because what's the difference between an A1C of 5.6 and an A1C of 5.7 that you can be said you have pre-diabetes? Really not that much. So it's a progression. We don't want to put, walls, but this is just for classification and diagnosis. So There are a lot of classifications of diabetes, and the common classification used is the clinical classification. And so type 1 diabetes, classical type 1 is diagnosed as a child, as a teenager, or as a kid, because your body is attacked by antibodies that your immune system is making against your own pancreas. And it's killing the cells called beta cells that make insulin. So you're essentially not making any insulin. And when that happens, your sugars are sky high and your fat deposits start getting broken down into something called ketones. And there's a lot of rage right now with the keto diet. Everybody's trying to measure their ketones in the urine, but down the presentation you'll realize that's probably not the best way to be measuring ketones in the urine. So when the ketones reach a certain amount, they are acidic, and they can really drop your body's acid balance, that you cannot keep up with breathing out that much acid through the carbon dioxide that you breathe out. And you have to be actually ended up in the hospital in the ICU on a ventilator machine that can breathe for you to get rid of all that acid. And it's quite fatal. It has a high fatality rate if it's not treated correctly and identified correctly. So that's how a classical type 1 gets diagnosed, and they're on insulin. And the idea for them is to not come off insulin on a better diet, but the idea is to make sure that they keep needing the least amount of insulin for the rest of their life. They can prevent complications from happening the rest of their life, and they can have a happy, thriving life instead of worrying about complications. It's about 5% of total diabetes burden. Type 2 diabetes, which is the predominant type, is 90 to 95%, and that's the one that is caused by insulin resistance. This word you have heard probably a few times, insulin resistance, and I'll explain what that means in a few slides further down. But it's happening because your insulin that the body makes is not working like it should. And there is probably a combination of your pancreas not being able to keep up with the amount of insulin that your body needs. Type 1.5, or latent autoimmune diabetes of adulthood, we call it LADA in abbreviation, is not very well recognized in the community, and even many physicians are not aware. And many times I see a type 2 diabetic patient being misdiagnosed who is actually a type 1.5. So it happens like type 1, that your body is making antibodies against the pancreas, and it's destroying the beta cells. And so your sugars are running high, so you do end up getting diagnosed with diabetes. But if you are, and the diagnosis happens usually in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th decade of life, so not like a typical type 1, which is early, teenage or under 10. So that's why they get misdiagnosed as type 2, but when they're put on doses of insulin that are resembling a type 2 diabetic patient, they start getting low blood sugars because they are not needing that much insulin. They are pretty much behaving like a type 1. They need a little bit of insulin. So if you put them on high doses, they're going to drop low sugars left and right. So it's important to realize that every diabetes that's diagnosed later in age doesn't necessarily mean it's type 2. My youngest type 2 diabetic is 20 years old. So it's not a disease of old anymore. It can happen to even teenagers. And you could have a 50-year-old person getting diagnosed with type 1.5. So this differentiation based on age is not necessarily true anymore. Gestational diabetes is the diabetes that happens during pregnancy, and it puts the lady at the risk of developing diabetes later in her life, as well as it puts her at risk of complications during the pregnancy and delivery, like preterm birth, big baby, and the baby also has risk of obesity and diabetes in his or her life down the line. So it's a very significant scenario. Maturity onset diabetes of young we call it MODY, is a small subtype. There are about 11 types identified, which is basically 11 different gene defects in enzymes that cover glucose metabolism. And those are treated with certain medications, oral medications called sulfonylureas. So that's a very restricted, limited type. Usually you see a very strong family history of young members getting diagnosed with diabetes, and it's very like the dad has it, the grandfather has it, uncles have it. It's a pretty distinct history, but it's not, luckily it's not a common variety. The majority is type 2, type 1, and type 1.5, and then gestational. So going into some data, as you can see, this top march of the maps is about obesity. And as you can see, in 1994, most of the United States had under 14% obesity rates. Only a couple of states, Louisiana and I believe that's Michigan or
Indiana.
Yeah. Is having about 14%, and then as the years go by, just in a matter of 15 years, we have pretty much gone about 26% of obesity in US adults throughout the country. And the same progression follows for diabetes. The light yellow or orange is actually under 4% prevalence. The orange that has Texas in the 1994 map is 4 to 5.9%. The dark orange with South Carolina in 1994 is 6 to 7.5%. The dark red in 2000 with Louisiana is more than 7.5 to 9. And then the real dark red is more than 9%. So this is 2009 data from CDC. If you look at 2015, 2017 data, it's actually pretty high there. Florida does relatively better, but overall, most of the country we are seeing close to 10% prevalence of diabetes. Some more numbers. So 30.3 million Americans, the bottom square there, have diabetes. And 1 in 4 of them, about 7 million people, don't know that they have diabetes. Goes back to that silent, no symptoms. 84 million people in US, American adults, have pre-diabetes. And 9 out of 10 people with pre-diabetes are not aware that they have pre-diabetes. That's a phenomenal number to have. It's 9 out of 10 people don't know. 16 million people will have some form of retinopathy from diabetes by 2050. 1 in 3rd US adult with diabetes ends up having kidney disease, and 1 in 5th with high blood pressure ends up having kidney disease. And most of the times we see people who have diabetes also have kidney disease and high blood pressure. So it's a combination. Huge cost. This is again 2012 data. $245 billion is the cost of diabetes care to the economy in terms of direct costs as well as indirect costs from loss of wages and productivity. 1 in every 5 healthcare dollars spent is spent for diabetes. 1/3 of physician visits, outpatient visits, are involving diabetes. 40%, close to 40% of outpatient hospital visits, like ER visits, are related to diabetes. So it covers a big portion of our healthcare. And 4 graphs there. As you can see on the top graph, the one with meat intake involving red meat, poultry, and fish. If you look at 1909, 123 pounds of meat consumption per person per year has almost doubled to 200 pounds in 2007. Chicken, same story.
10.4 pounds in 1909, 59.9, so almost 6 times. On the contrary, refined sugars, although I'm not saying refined sugars are good, but refined sugars, which initially were high, then high fructose corn syrup came up, and so it replaced it. So eventually they were still high, but as you see, there's a downtrending trend in terms of sugar consumption, but we are not seeing a downtrend in diabetes or obesity or heart disease or stroke or cancer. It's still going up. So again, I'm not saying sugar is good, refined sugar is bad, but that's not the real cause. Cheese. From under 4 pounds in 1909 per person per year, we are almost 10 times again. So things have really changed in the last 100 years. Our genes haven't changed. Genes take ages, thousands and thousands of years to change. What has changed is our food environment. How is it grown? How is it cooked? How we live our lives. That's what has changed. So we talk about insulin resistance a lot, but let's first understand what is insulin, normal insulin secretion. So insulin is demonized a lot in a lot of public health messaging. Insulin is a very essential hormone. We need that. If you don't have insulin, like a type 1 who is not making insulin and doesn't get insulin, he or she will die. So insulin is essential for life. The issue is that we make too much insulin because of the foods we eat, which leads to a lot of other problems. So normally, in a normal scenario, you make a little bit of insulin, about a unit an hour, 24/7. Even if you don't eat a morsel of food for days and days, your body will still make a little bit of insulin because it has to make sure that your body doesn't start breaking down fat into ketones and you end up in that acidotic state. But when we eat, and contrary to what people think that only carbs can cause insulin to go up, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, all of those can cause insulin to be released. So it is not just carbs and insulin. Any food you eat can cause insulin to be released. And depending on what you eat and how much you eat, it may be high or low, but it is released with each meal and goes down again you eat, it goes up. So this advice that is commonly given, that eat 6 small meals through the day for patients with diabetes, is actually contradictory to what the science shows, because studies have shown if you eat 6 meals a day versus eating 3 meals a day, you have a lot better weight, blood pressure, sugar, and all metrics, because you're reducing the amount of insulin that either you have to take or that your body is pumping out through the day. So we need insulin, but we don't need a lot of insulin. So less is better. We don't need zero, we don't need too much. Again, as I said, this linear concept that, because carbohydrates can cause insulin to go up, you eat less carbohydrates, less insulin, less blood sugar, less insulin. That is not true. And based on that concept, back in the 70s, we had Atkins diet. So all high fat and protein, very little carbs, under 50 grams a day, and we didn't see a drop in diabetes or obesity or heart disease. It went up. We had the South Beach diet, same story, new repackaging. Paleo diet, ketogenic diet. We just keep getting repackaged versions of this where it's recommended to eat high amounts of fat, which is mainly coming from animal sources, eggs, cheese, butter, meats, dairy, and a lot of animal protein, and then very little carbs, because carbs are demonized. The carbs are bad, carbs are bad. We are kind of ingrained to think that carbs are like some real poison that we should be running miles away from, but it's contrary to what we need. We need carbohydrates. That's the primary source of fuel for all our cells. So again, I'm trying to explain this in a very simplified manner. It doesn't happen this simplistically, but just for explanation, this is a muscle cell, and you see insulin as the keys on one side, and then the red tubules are actually the insulin receptor where it binds to. So it's like the insulin is unlocking a lock with the key of insulin. And what happens is inside the cell, a bunch of enzymatic actions happen, and that should make those purple channels that you see on the other part of the diagram to be plugging into the cell wall so that it can allow the sugar to enter the cell. Now, our heart, all other muscles in our body, and our fat cells, those are the three places where we need insulin to bind and do this magic so that these channels open up. Without that insulin binding in those three tissues, you won't have any sugar entering the cell. Our brain can take up sugar without any need for insulin. Our red blood cells can take up sugar without any need for insulin. And we have been designed in that manner that half of our glucose is consumed by the brain cells. They are very high metabolic rate cells and they consume a lot of fuel, which is sugar, glucose. So, but for muscle, heart, and fat tissue, which we call adipose tissue, that's where we need insulin to bind and do its magic. But when you start having foods like cheese, eggs, dairy, meat, you start getting deposits of fat, this yellow pictures there, which starts clogging up the mechanism of the insulin inside the cell. And those channels which are supposed to bind up into the cell wall, the purple ones, don't go up. So your sugar runs high because it's not able to enter the cell. So that's insulin resistance in very simple terms. So you start seeing fat depositing in your muscle cell, in your liver cells, where it's not designed to deposit. It's designed to deposit in your fat cells, the adipose tissue. But you start seeing fat deposition from the food you're eating into these tissues, and that's when the insulin, when it binds to these tissues, does not do what it's supposed to do. So your sugar runs high, your liver, in spite of sugar running high, keeps cranking sugar into the blood by a process called gluconeogenesis. So there are a bunch of things that happen because insulin not being able to do what it's supposed to do. So enough of data and molecular biology. So what's the state of reality today? So I put up a cartoon there, but I see that once in a while where the patient is saying, yes, I believe in prevention, can you prescribe a pill which makes me not smoke, and I don't have to exercise, and I don't have to watch my drinking and food. So we have this mindset of getting quick fixes. Health is not a quick fix. Success doesn't have short steps. So you have to put in the time and the resources to get to health. And this is a sad reality that we are fed by the food industry, which doesn't have any attention to health. And we are treated by the health industry, which has no attention to food. It's really sad, and PDNF is an effort to break that reality and turn it around. A small contribution that we're trying to make. So stop the crap. CRAP. C for carbonated drinks. Now, I've had so many times that people say, oh, I only get diet soda. Well, diet soda is actually worse than regular soda. Not that I'm saying drink regular soda, but both are bad. The artificial sweeteners can trick your brain to eating more sugar. It still clogs up your liver and it ravages your gut microbiome. The bacteria that we carry in our gut are very important. So if they are not the good type or they are not surviving well, then we are not healthy either. So take the C out of the crap. Refined sugars, again, everybody knows that, candies and a lot of things which have refined sugar, not good. Artificial foods, we see this aisles after aisles of processed foods which looks like food, but there is nothing really real food in it. There's so many additives and chemicals and food flavorings that taste like food, but they are really all chemicals. There is no nutrition value in it. And processed food, so I've had times where people say, oh, I'm eating a plant-based diet, but I'm eating potato chips and ketchup and Oreo cookies. So if that's your concept of vegetables, and grains, then that's not what I'm trying to convey. This is what I'm trying to convey. The rainbow. Each color of fruits and vegetables that we have in nature has huge, huge nutrients. We call them phytonutrients. And each of them has a specific function. They may be fighting cancer cells, they may be good for heart, they may be good for your brain, they may be good for your immune system, for your arteries. So keep eating from the rainbow. And you see those percentages are not big here, but a majority of people don't really get, close to 60-70% of people don't get all the colors in through the day. There is an excellent dietitian, Juliana Hewer. She has this slide which I took to show here. So think of food as this plate there, and if you can swap that section with avocado and nuts to the right side and swap the one with the pulses and beans to the left side, it becomes very easier. So half of your daily meals should be vegetables and beans. And vegetables meaning not just kale and broccoli and all the greens, but starchy vegetables like yams and sweet potatoes and rutabagas and turnips and peppers and onions and all the colors that you can get. So don't get in this carbohydrate fat protein. When you look at food groups. Don't think of it as a fat or protein or a carbohydrate source. Food is food. It has all of those in it in every food that you have. So don't think of grains as protein or carbohydrates or beans as protein or potatoes as carbs. So everything has all those ingredients in it. If you eat the right amount, you get enough. So half of your daily diet, fruits, vegetables and beans, 1/4 would be fresh fruit, and remaining quarter would be unrefined grains like quinoa, brown rice, bulgur wheat, millet, barley, amaranth, oats, and a handful of nuts and seeds, where you get all the essential minerals and good fatty acids. Then you can do a plant-based version of keto where you're eating lots of nuts and seeds and avocados and taking a bunch of coconut and olive oil. At the most, you may want to do it maybe for a few weeks if you want to jumpstart your weight loss, but it is not something that you want to do long term, because even if it's plant-based, you can still end up getting the insulin resistance that you're going to be getting from eating animal food. So short term, few weeks, jumpstart, okay. Long-term strategy, really bad. Stick with, more fruits, vegetables, beans, and whole grains. You can think of it as a traffic light. So green is you can eat as much as you want, as much as you like. All the green leafy, starchy, non-starchy vegetables, beans, lentils, fruits, intact whole grains. So a whole wheat bread is not an intact whole grain. But a multi-grain bread, where you can actually see the grain, is a better version. But that, again, should be less. You want to actually eat the quinoa, the buckwheat, the millet, the barley, all those whole grains. Herbs and spices play a big role. And I come from India, where spices are ubiquitous in our cooking. So spices have a huge role in immunity, in your body's function. Turmeric, pepper, cumin, the list is endless. So have spices in your cooking. Yellow foods are the ones that you want to eat, some, not a lot. So nut seeds, avocado, the whole coconut, not the coconut oil, but the coconut meat, the white shredded coconut. You can use it as a flavor on your food. Whole olives, not the olive oil. Sprouted breads or multigrain breads, again, less is better. And really work on cutting back on dairy, processed meats, eggs, cheese. Like Dr. Reddy mentions, anything that has a face like a mama or poops, try to skip it out. And refined foods like refined sugars, pastries, cookies, candies, cakes. There are a lot better alternatives of making those same comfort foods from whole plant food options. Caloric density is something that is important to understand. So, as you see, there are 5 pictures with stomach, and they're all filled with food that is 500 calories. But on the left, you see 500 calories fills up your whole stomach from fruits and vegetables. If you eat rice, potato, and beans, it will still do almost 90-95%. Meat, half of it, or maybe less than half. Cheese, barely 20%. Oil would barely line up your stomach. So which foods would feel more satiated? The ones on the left or the ones on the right? Oh, sorry, the ones on the right or the ones on the left? Excuse my side orientation here. The more the fiber, the better it is. Fiber is the invisible nutrient that we all need. So don't buy Ben fiber or psyllium and start putting spoonfuls of it in your water and food, but actually eat the foods which have the fiber in it. And the fiber we eat is broken down into two things, soluble and insoluble. The insoluble cannot be broken down further, but the gut bacteria, the bugs that we carry, more than 100 trillion in our body, they break that down into short-chain fatty acids, which are actually good for our brain, and they connect to the brain through the vagus nerve. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. We eat something that is food for them, and they break it down into something that is good for us. So get the fiber going. Glycemic index, and glycemic load, people think about it. Well, yes, it is an important aspect, but if you can see the list of foods on the bottom, the ones with the highest glycemic load are actually processed foods, whereas the ones which are whole foods, starting from even a boiled potato, is still under 20 for the glycemic load, and it just keeps going down. So grapes, people think, grapes have sugar, I shouldn't be eating it. Well, fruit does not cause diabetes. It comes with the fiber, it comes with the nutrients, the minerals, which actually prevents the fast absorption of sugar. So in spite of grapes being considered high glycemic, their glycemic load in terms of what you eat and how high the sugars could be going is still very low. So food can be fun. It is not that eating a plant-based diet is boring. There is so much action and fun and so many tastes and textures that you can taste. You want to keep a check on your sugars. You want to eat less foods with saturated fat. So if you're avoiding animal foods and eating more coconut oil, well, that's not the way to go. Keeping saturated fats as least as possible and relying on whole nuts, seeds, and avocado in a small amount to get your healthy fats is a better way. Eating whole foods. There is no way around eating whole foods. If it's a jam, that's not good. If it's the whole fruit, that's not better. Less oil. So oils are inflammatory. Yes, oils are derived from plants, but they are very high in omega-6 fatty acids, which are very inflammatory. They cause plaques. We don't need them. We need them, but not in the proportion that we have find them in the oils. So less oil is better. We as a family consume almost 95% less oil than what we used to consume 10 years ago. And we are trying to work on the last 5% to go completely oil-free. But as you start doing that, your palate changes so fast that when you have something that is made in even a little more oil, it feels like you're eating grease. Your body starts telling you that this is not the right food. So you're not just trying to restrict things yourself, but your body is giving you